So there I was asleep at 7 PM in the evening when I woke up and saw that the Game Maker Toolkit jam had started. I wasn't planning on joining. I thought, hey, maybe I would look at the theme.
Joined together.
Hey, that's interesting. Maybe I could make a game where two characters are attached, something like Push Me, Pull You. Oh. Well, maybe I could try something abstract. Not take the theme quite so literally. Something like a jigsaw or something. God damn it. So I sat down for a while and had a think. I for some reason had some kind of obsession with yarn-based ideas. No clue why, but I had one idea that wasn't yarn-based. What if you had a game where the only way you could move around was to throw something else that you were stuck to? That might work. So to start things off, you only needed a player, target location, and object you could throw. Making the basics of all these wasn't too difficult, but the pulling part was. The objects had to be attached, but I couldn't just parent them together, because then you wouldn't really be throwing the object, you would be throwing yourself, and it would also make picking back up the object a pain to program. Instead I looked up a tutorial on making some kind of grappling hook-like device, and through using a distance joint, I could attach two objects together that would only exert a force on one another if they got far enough away. Then when I wanted to throw again, I could just destroy the old object and spawn a new one at the player and give it a new velocity vector. Perfect. Getting through the art, I realised this was going to decide the game setting more than anything else. I could go futuristic, or fantasy, or modern, or whatever. I know that games involving cute characters tend to get more recognition, so I went for a more Robin Hood style character taking place in some kind of archery competition. In these kind of game jams, the visual aspect of it is really going to sell, and it's more likely it's going to get you to the final Game Maker Toolkit video that's made about the game jam. So I went with the idea of an archery competition, and my thrown object would be an arrow that is attached to the player through a rope or something. This ended up working quite well and feeling very right. Since the object was now an arrow, I thought it would be even more fun if when you fired it, it would get stuck in the wall, allowing you to chain grapple and swing around the levels. Kinda like in the old Spider-Man games. So I made the arrow a trigger and just made it so whenever it collided with anything that wasn't a player, it would just freeze its rigid body in place. This then gave you a stable foothold where you could swing from. Since we were going for an archery theme, our target was simply just going to be a target, and if the arrow collides with the target, then you win the level. Next I move on to making a tile map and a background image. Some simple grassy hills and platforms could easily do the job. Obviously this isn't the most high-def pixel art. When you're under a 48-hour time constraint, you kinda had to make do. At this point it was midnight, I realised I had to get some sleep if I wanted to keep working on the project. Now for music, I'd normally rely on someone else, but everyone I knew was actually very busy on such short notice. And since the music is such an important aspect of the game for me, I knew I'd have to try something myself. Now as I said before, I don't actually have a lot of talent in the music department, and having to make music and fit the entire game in 2 hours with no experience or software wasn't going to be easy. I downloaded FL Studio and tried to make something appropriate. This was honestly the most difficult part for me. Not only do I not know the theory behind making music, I don't even know how to use the software. After 2 hours and a lot of frustration, I managed to make an 8-second loop that did make me want to blow my brains out upon listening over it multiple times. That would have to do. Not perfect by any stretch, but good enough for the amount of time I had left to spend on it, which at this point was about 0 seconds. I quickly patched that into the game and moved on to the next stage of sound. Okay, the music isn't amazing, but if there's one thing I've learned in college, it's that mediocre work can be seen as moderately okay if you mostly cover it up with other okay stuff. So I got to writing a script for the voiceover that would keep the brunt of the player's attention. When I did move on to the script writing, it led me to play around with the game mechanics I was making. Since you can only move by shooting your arrow, the first question a player would have is why can't I move on my own? I could implement movement, but this would kind of take away from the joined together theme and would mean that I had to implement more character art to indicate walking, which I did not have time for. My career as an outstanding pixel artiste is still only beginning. Keeping the game constrained was the best method for the time I had left and to help build my skills of innovation. So instead, the script would focus on the game being unfinished. The programmer was lazy and did do all the work making the game incomplete, and the narrator would figure this out as the player does, giving it kind of a Stanley Parable feeling. This unfinished idea also allows me to play around with some more concept, like the designer being so lazy that one level is just impossible to do anything without even immediately winning.
Oh, now this is just plain lazy. Where's the challenge, the conflict? Well, let's just get this over with.
So the general narrative went that in the beginning we expect the game to work as intended, but stuff just keeps being broken. The middle of the narrative, we the player and the narrator trying to adapt to their surroundings to try and work out new solutions for the problems. And the end of the story would be that the game is just too broken to continue, so the narrator gets angry and leaves to give out to the developer. I wanted to end on the idea of an unfinished, not completable level, as when the player does eventually shoot an arrow, they realise there's only one way to go, so they just keep going this way and eventually win. I feel this kind of gives a player a sense of accomplishment because you've just beaten a level proclaimed to be impossible. Then at the end, the narrator informs you that they've given out to the developer and they're going to fix all the problems, but just realises you've actually completed the game without them. So they just try to cash out as fast as possible and leave. This added bit of humour gives a bit more character and individuality to my game. This makes it so hopefully my game will stand out a bit more if someone else decides to go for this grappling hook take on the theme. No matter how good they are, they won't be able to bring my individuality to the table. And with the recordings implemented, it was midnight again, I had to go back to sleep. I woke up early and decided I was going to jump straight into making some more levels for the game. Level design in theory is easy and is simplified into 3 main principles. You teach the player some mechanic, they have to use that mechanic to solve a problem, then this learning is reinforced through escalating complexity. In general, if a player doesn't know what to do, that's kind of the fault of the game designer. There are notable exceptions, but in general this rule holds true. If you're looking to improve your levels, there is a myriad of things you can add to teach the mechanics to the players. Some of the easiest but least effective is by telling them, hey, push the jump button to jump. This can be done through text or audio. For simple game mechanics, or for those that have persisted since the inception of the medium, this is usually fine for regular gamers, but newcomers will often struggle with these simple mechanics, like using a joystick to look around. They don't have it ingrained in them yet how to do it, so they struggle to learn it when they're taught via this method. Other methods are indirect. You don't explicitly tell the player what to do, but you give them all the tools and time they need to figure it out. Brackeys has a great video using a simple scene to convey this method, by using movement, colour, lighting, contrast and composition. Since this activates more of their logical reasoning, this tends to be more effective at teaching and retention. Given enough development time, everyone should strive for the second method. For my game, I tried to include both of these aspects to try cover my bases. The narrator would tell you what to do, but due to the game being broken, you'd have to puzzle together a workaround solution that I hope would ingrain the game mechanics more effectively due to its subversion of the expectations. For what would normally be a crouching tutorial, you couldn't just crouch and get through the gap, so you have to experiment a little. You can't shoot through the hole, so there's only one other way to go. In shooting the arrow to the left, the arrow lodges into the wall and you realise you can remain suspended using the arrow. You reload your bow to shoot and this causes you to drop, so you learn that to fire again you need to release your only foothold, introducing some level of difficulty. From here you can swing your way around to the target and you've learned the game mechanics to its fullest. This is then reinforced in the next level where you're meant to combine all the traditional methods of movement to solve the level. Instead you actually reinforce the game mechanics you've just learned, and if you're fast enough you might learn that you can actually keep yourself perpetually suspended in the air. Even the main menu can be utilised to teach someone the basic game mechanics. Keep your menu in the world and the player will have to use the game mechanics to navigate it. This often means the player has learned a few basics before they even start the game. With this finished, I had about 3 hours left until the game jam finished. Now this put me in a bit of a strange position, and one you might find yourself in as a game developer. I could try adding something more to the game, possibly improving the fun capacity, or I could build it and publish it now to test how the WebGL version of the game works. There was more I wanted to add, such as a score/power system, so you could try complete levels in as few shots as possible, or a timer for speedruns, or just a big playground with lots of platforms so the players could have fun just playing with the swinging mechanics. But I decided to just publish instead, and here's why. Firstly, if I publish now, that means I'm a bit more safe in making sure my submission was entered okay. For this jam last year and this year, itch went down for a few minutes as submissions approached close. This is probably because so many people were uploading and submitting at once and people were playing each other's games that the entire platform just shut down. Now thankfully Mark from GameMaker's Toolkit recognised this issue and made an allowance for late submissions, but he wasn't obliged to do so and could have decided not to. Secondly, it allowed me to playtest my game on itch. I'm not entirely sure why, but it seems like the itch platform handles games a bit differently than your own personal builds. It might be due to bandwidth limitations, or the game host's server side, or the WebGL building process, or whatever. But this just means sometimes bugs that didn't exist in your personal build of the game do exist on itch. In my case there are a few, mostly UI problems, like the credits being hyper zoomed, and some issues with the rope that joins the player to the arrow would sometimes appear for a single frame in the screen in its last location. If I decided to leave my game to the last minute, I would have missed these bugs, and I would have also been implementing other systems that might also have been bugged. For any kind of game release, it's better to release a small, well-polished project than a large-scale buggy mess. The bugs take away from the game experience and make a game far less enjoyable. Sure, look at Fallout 76. So with that we have Playtester, a 2D platformer where the only way to move forward is to draw back that bowstring, or where you and the narrator can share in your disdain for the lazy developer. So this time I learned a small bit of music making skills. A very small amount. And I learned more about working under tight time constraints and decisions and sacrifices you have to make to meet those deadlines. Finally, I recognise that if you don't have a lot of experience or proficiency in one area like music, you can prop it up using other skills you're stronger and more proficient in. If you aren't as good as art, prop up the art with good game mechanics, or vice versa. This likely won't be acceptable for a full game release that you're expected to charge for, that's where outsourcing comes in, but for a tight deadline game jam it's more than reasonable. Well sure, look, I hope you learn from my experience too. And with that, cheers. Take it easy. So I just finished editing the video and I realised that I actually didn't mention that the game jam is still open and you can vote for stuff right now. So go on to itch.io and vote in the game jam, preferably well for my project. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, like it, and if you want to stick around, try subscribing. And I'll see you in the next one.